Nikolai Petrovich completed 502 combat missions, participated in 40 air battles, in which he personally shot down 2 aircraft and 12 as part of a group. He was awarded 4 Orders of the Red Banner. I was born in 1922 and from an early age was drawn to the sea. After school, I dreamed of becoming a sailor, wanting to study to become a navigator for long voyages. I even wrote a request to a maritime school on the Black Sea, and they replied, "Send your documents." But I hesitated. The journey was long, my parents weren't well off, and there wasn't enough money for the trip. So I decided to try applying to a military school. At the recruitment office, they told me there were no spots in the aviation technical school, but there was an opening in a cavalry school in Georgia. I declined. I had loved horses since childhood. Before I could even walk, I was riding. My father would water the horses, put me on their backs, and I'd ride. But despite my love for them, I didn't want to join the cavalry. In the end, I took my documents and by chance met some girls I knew who were heading to apply to the Ordzhonikidze Mining and Metallurgical College. They persuaded me to go with them. That's how I ended up at the college, where we were well fed, given a stipend, and life seemed to be coming together. There I joined an aero club. My first training aircraft was a II. About 50 of us gathered, but a strict medical commission narrowed it down to 22. A month later, only 4 of us remained, including me. The others couldn't handle the strain. Balancing studies at the college with aero club training was tough. I learned to fly at the Ordzhonikidze Aero Club. At first, it felt like a game, but then I got a taste for flying. We flew in 2 shifts, morning and afternoon, because there were only 2 II planes and we had to wait our turn. Gradually, the 4 of us from the college completed the training. That's when I knew for sure that my life would be tied to aviation. After the Aero Club, I enrolled in the Yeisk Naval Aviation School. The selection was very strict. First, the medical commission weeded out many applicants. Then the vetting commissions checked our backgrounds and origins, and we even had to take exams in mathematics and Russian. Out of the 50 people who arrived with me, half didn't make it through. The first training aircraft, there was a UT-2, and later we moved to I-16 trainers before transitioning to combat aircraft. For me, it was a powerful experience, seeing planes that flew at such speeds. After the II and UT-2, it seemed unbelievable that we could control such machines. We were green kids, but they put us in charge of fighters. When the Germans approached Yeisk, the school was relocated to Mozdok. We were transported in train cars. There weren't enough planes for everyone, so most cadets traveled in freight cars. Our group was stationed in the village of Galyugayevskaya. We lived in a school building where we set up 2-tier bunks. Classes were held there too. The training airfields were in villages, flat fields with minimal equipment. We flew UT-2s, and back in Yeisk, I had an instructor named Nenashev, who was my first and only mentor on that plane. He later went to the front and flew II-2s. Discipline at the school was strict. We were divided into groups, each assigned an instructor. My friends from the Aero Club had different fates. Some ended up on MBR-2 seaplanes, others were rejected for health reasons. But my friend Parfyonov and I stayed in fighters. The training was accelerated. In peacetime, the course lasted 3 years, but we had only a year and a half. We managed to learn individual piloting, shoot at targets, and practice a bit of group flying, but overall, we graduated as greenhorns. By late 1941, the school was graduating U.S. not as cadets, but as combat pilots because the war demanded reinforcements. That's how we ended up in the forming 11th Fighter Aviation Regiment. After graduation, we were assigned to the 11th Fighter Aviation Regiment. Squadron and flight commanders were appointed from instructors, while we, yesterday's cadets, became wingmen. The regiment was formed right at the school and consisted mostly of young sergeants barely 20 years old. The atmosphere in the regiment was tough. The regiment commander and commissar were harsh. Sometimes it led to tragedy. I remember one cadet who was sent back to fly a UT-2 for a minor infraction. He couldn't handle the humiliation and shot himself. We were young and inexperienced, and they treated us cruelly. The regiment commander himself didn't fly combat missions, only circling the airfield. In early 1942, we were sent to Okolovka Station, beyond Bologoy. A clearing was made in the forest, dugouts were built, and a temporary airfield was set up. The frost reached -35 degrees Celsius, but we continued training. I-16 planes were fitted with skis. In Okolovka, we started flying in groups and practiced shooting at towed targets. Then a disaster struck. During a training dogfight, two planes collided. The flight commander died, and the squadron commander, Golosenko, parachuted but never returned to service. It was our first serious reminder that flying meant risking your life. After brief training, we were transferred to the Gorovaldi airfield. There we had I-16s, MBR-2s, and I-15Bs planes. Our aircraft were stationed on the frozen lake, covered with white nets. There were no hangars, we were out in the open. Germans and Finns flew nearby. Sometimes dogfights happened right above the airfield, but there were no major bombings. That's how the real war began for us. Young, inexperienced pilots who only knew how to take off and land but were forced to engage the enemy. We started flying combat missions on I-16s. The plane was outdated but maneuverable. We joked, on an I-16 you can't catch up or escape. It lacked speed, but you could spin and evade the enemy. The main rule was to watch your tail and, if possible, go for a head-on attack. Germans avoided head-on attacks, but we had no choice. In the first winter of the war, we had almost no victories. The system for counting kills was vague. Confirmations came from other pilots or bomber crews we escorted. Sometimes victories were credited, sometimes not. As a young and inexperienced pilot, I never claimed a kill unless I saw the enemy plane go down. So some of my actual kills weren't counted. I flew as a wingman for Konstantin Kovalyov, a short, agile, and experienced pilot. He survived the entire war and became a hero of the Soviet Union. Our flight also included Lomachin and Yeremyans. We stuck together and learned in combat. Losses were heavy. Many flight commanders died in the first months, but those who survived quickly became skilled. Combat experience came slowly. At first, we only took off and landed, then learned to shoot, but coordinated group actions were almost non-existent. We had to learn everything on the front, often at the cost of lives. That's when I first felt what real war was. When the enemy was higher, faster, stronger, and all you had was youth, persistence, and a desire to survive. We often returned from missions in riddled planes, and sometimes didn't return at all. In August 1942, our squadron was transferred to the 21st Fighter Aviation Regiment. We arrived as a group: Kovalyov, Lomachin, Yeremyans, me, and a few others. I fought most of the war in this regiment. We flew I-16s until May 1943. By then I had completed hundreds of missions, and only after that did I switch to Yaks. Half of my combat missions were on I-16s. One of the most memorable episodes was escorting transport Douglases. We called them the Air Road of Life. These planes evacuated people from blockaded Leningrad. A Douglas would land at the Berngardovka airfield. We'd take it under our protection and escort it to Novaya Ladoga. The task was simple: keep the enemy away. Sometimes Germans tried to attack, but we'd rush into head-on attacks as a foursome to drive them off. Once, 6 Messerschmitts came straight at us, but we engaged and managed to shoot down 2 without losing anyone. It was a rare success and a great source of pride. Most often, we escorted Il-2 attack aircraft. Sometimes we joined them in ground attacks. For example, during a raid on the Kotly airfield, the first mission went well. The attack aircraft destroyed many German planes on the ground. The second time, they were waiting for us. We fought right above the airfield with Germans trying to attack our Il-2s, but we managed to fend them off. Still, we took losses. Those missions were grueling. We went into attacks alongside the attack aircraft, coming under anti-aircraft fire. Now I realize it was poor tactics. Our job was to provide cover, but we dove into the thick of it. Back then, we didn't argue. We followed orders. Many battles took place over Lake Ladoga and around Konovets Island. Finnish pilots were frequent opponents there. Fights with them were tough and fair. They flew faster, better armed Fiats, but they never shied away from combat, fighting to the end. Germans were different. They hit from a dive and quickly climbed away. Prolonged dogfights with them were rare, but Finns fought differently, making those battles especially hard. With each month, we gained experience. I was still a wingman but felt more confident in the air. The number of missions grew, and with it, the sense that war had become our daily life. When we started fighting, flights consisted of 3 planes. It was inconvenient and ineffective. Covering each other in battle was hard, and losses were significant. Later, the structure changed. A flight became 4 planes or 2 pairs. That made it easier. A wingman watched the leader's tail, and one pair could cover the other. When escorting attack aircraft, we often used the scissors tactic. 2 pairs flew opposite courses above the attack aircraft, constantly crisscrossing to keep the airspace under control. It was more convenient and safer. If an attack was needed, we'd group as a foursome and dive together. Sometimes things went wrong. Fighters were sent on ground attacks with attack aircraft. In those cases, we came under anti-aircraft fire, losing people in planes. It would have been more effective to cover them from the sides and above. But back then, tactics were still being developed in combat, and mistakes cost lives. In battles with Germans and Finns, we saw a big difference. Germans rarely engaged in prolonged fights. A strike from a dive, a burst, and they'd climb away. They acted cautiously and calculatedly. Finns were different. They fought to the end. Meeting them over Konevets or Kotka, we knew it would be a real fight with no evasion. They went head-on, maneuvered with us, and tried to shoot down our attack aircraft fairly, not through tricks. That's why fights with them were the toughest. Radio communication was a problem. On I-16s, the radios were poor, full of static, and we often just removed them. We flew silently, relying on signals and conventions. On Yaks, radios improved, and we could tune in to the leader. That made coordination easier, but in the early years, we fought almost blindly, relying on our eyes and intuition. Tactics evolved and we learned. From the first greenhorn missions to coordinated actions as a foursome, only a year passed, but it was filled with losses, mistakes, and hard-earned experience. Over the years of war, I had many comrades, but almost all of them died. From the Orjonikidze Aero Club, 3 of us applied: Parfionov, Denschik, and Odintsov. Denschik was rejected for health reasons. Odintsov was sent to MBR-2 seaplanes, and Parfionov and I ended up in fighters. My true combat friends were Kovalyov, Lomakin, and Yeremians. We formed one combat foursome. Kovalyov was my first leader. Short, quick, brave. He survived the war and earned the title of hero. Lomakin was a strong pilot but died in battle. Yeremians, my close friend, always flew as Lomakin's wingman, but he didn't return from a mission either. Some had different fates. Parfionov ended up in another regiment, fought well, and survived the war without a scratch. We later met in Sevastopol, but most of my classmates and comrades died, some in the first battles, others later on missions. I always believed that camaraderie in the air was everything. We covered each other, shared victories. Sometimes I shot down a plane myself, but recorded it as a group victory, so my wingman would get credit too, since he risked his life with me. That's how it worked out. Some victories were personal, others shared. There were a few who shirked missions, hid or found excuses not to fly. They were rare, but we despised them. To us, it meant one thing: cowardice. I saw strong commanders who never refused a mission. An order meant going into the air. That's why I respected those who flew to the end, even when the odds were slim. Those years took almost all my friends. Those I considered brothers disappeared one by one. All that remained were memories and the emptiness after each loss. War quickly taught us to make decisions and fight not only the enemy, but also our equipment. I remember one incident. During a battle over Konevets, my I-16 took a hit. A shell tore off a piece of the wing, and the plane went into a spin. I was ready to bail out with my parachute, but at the last second, I decided to fight for the plane. I barely pulled it out of the spin and managed to land. That was the first time I realized how thin the line between life and death was. Equipment often failed us. On Yaks, there was a serious issue with rivets in the control system. I saw 2 young pilots die. They were training, went into a steep dive, and couldn't pull out. Everyone thought it was pilot error, but when I flew after them, I heard a crack in the controls and felt the stick go empty. Thanks to instinct, I didn't yank it and pulled out using the trim. When I landed, we found the rivets had come loose and the controls were barely holding. After that, they inspected the planes, re-riveted them, and the problem was fixed. But 2 young lives were already gone. Losses from poor training were horrific. You can't train a good pilot in 6 months. Many died not in combat, but during training. In peacetime, training took 3 years, but we were rushed through in a year and a half or less. That's why we went to the front as greenhorns, and only experienced commanders saved us from death. Comparing different planes, I can say, the I-16 was outdated but sturdy and agile. The LA-GG-3 was heavy but resilient, able to return to base damage. The Yak was fast but vulnerable due to its water-cooled engine. I loved the LA-5 for its air-cooled engine, but I never got to fly it. The Hurricane, supplied by the Allies, was the weakest. Pilots flying them suffered heavy losses. Every mission was a brush with death. Sometimes we got lucky, sometimes not. But I always remembered one thing. If you're afraid, you'll die. If you believe in yourself and your comrade, you have a chance to return. By the end of the war, I had 502 combat missions and 40 air battles. Some victories were personal, others group efforts. I often shared victories with my wingmen because I thought it was fair to acknowledge their contribution. Over the years, I was wounded twice but returned to service. I was awarded 4 Orders of the Red Banner. Many of my comrades died. My combat friends Lomakin and Yeremyants didn't return. Kovalyov survived, fought through the war, and received the hero title. Parfyonov also survived, fought honorably, and continued serving after the war. But almost none of my graduating class lived to see victory. I remember the tough battles over Lake Ladoga, Leningrad, Konovets, Kotka, and Priozersk. We escorted attack aircraft, participated in raids, and protected transport planes. Every mission could be our last, so we never thought about slogans. None of us shouted for Stalin. We fought for our homeland, our families, and to keep the enemy from taking our land. After the war, I knew my prospects were limited. I had no higher education, so I wouldn't advance foreign service. I was demobilized and became a designer. I met with surviving comrades, but over the years, we saw each other less often, and many passed away. Sometimes I think about what the war gave me. It took almost all my friends, left scars and pain, but it taught me to value life and camaraderie. We were boys when we climbed into fighter cockpits, and we grew up there, in the sky, where every moment decided everything. Now, decades later, I can say, we held on. We didn't let Leningrad fall. We did what we had to. And though much in our aviation was wrong, tactics, training, equipment, we managed. We fought for our homeland and survived when the odds were slim.